Welcome, everybody. And I think this is my 13th edition of talks over slightly over a year, starting from last year. For this edition, I have two of my friends, colleagues, and authors, Ramesh and Som. So let me, kind of give you a quick both formal and informal intro of both. Many of you may know them already if you're from the HR fraternity, but if you're not, then they're all veterans who've been there, done that in many organizations. So let me start with Ramesh. So Ramesh, we call him Ramesh Sound. So Ramesh and me met in Infosys when I was a kid, and he was already looking a little bit like this even then, but a little younger. Uh, but he was heading the OD for Infi at that point of time, and instrumental in getting the PCMM, kind of framework instituted, and always very academic, always very thoughtful in his, kind of approach. And from Infi, Ramesh moved on to Saskin and CA, and then started his own consulting venture called Culstran. Is it pronounced Culstran, Ramesh, or how do you pronounce it?
Culstran. So, I mean, that's okay.
Culstran Consulting. So now he specializes largely in HR analytics. He wrote his first book, many years ago, and I think is this your third book, Ramesh, or second one? Second book, okay. So, and he specializes in HR analytics. He's done a lot of work in that field in the last, few years, done a lot of trainings, collaborated with SHRM, and he's simply one of the top experts in HR analytics in the country. So very happy to have Ramesh over here. And, he's also done some he does some teaching work, and I think he's very good at it. I was, got the opportunity to be in one of his cohorts, and he does some work for XLRI Delhi NCR, and their program is called Digital HR Transformation and People Analytics. And Ramesh kind of architects the whole program and runs it, and he's done many cohorts of it, and does an excellent job of engaging with the kind of people who participate in it. So very nice to have you here, Ramesh. So, good to see you and good to have you on this thing. I also have uh, Somnath, and again, all of us met in Infosys in the early 2000s and had long stints over here. Our, kind of our longest stints in our career have probably been, kind of at Infi, and that's where, and we have a lot of, kind of good vibes in that stint. Som is mostly been in corporate. I think he got out for a bit and then went back to corporate. And now, of course, he's a newly minted author as well. And again, Som is the thinker, strategic person. But the interesting thing about Som is he's done many roles. Even in his time in Infosys, he, kind of moved across different functions, and then, of course, went on to head HR in different companies. And wherever he's been, he's made a difference as a HR head. Just Tesco is where he is currently. He's also become the site head recently, I think. And he heads the people function over there. And these are all, companies which are rated as the best companies to work in the country, especially Tesco and Jute, or some of his, kind of recent stints. He's really been instrumental in, kind of architecting culture and driving strategies. So, welcome again, Som. So, both of them have written this book called Thriving on Talent. Just launched maybe I think a couple of months back.
Yeah, a little longer than that.
Still they're still on their tours, doing signing tours, and kind of promoting the book. And I got this opportunity to kind of get them to come and talk mostly about the book, but also from their own experience, so that we kind of learn from them. So welcome everybody, and just pitch in if you have questions in between. We'll obviously come to the audience towards the end, but this is a smaller interactive group, and feel free to, kind of raise your hand or, kind of ping me so that we can also take your questions as and when it comes. So let me start off with, kind of a thing. So why this topic, Som and Ramesh? Why this topic? What prompted you? What's the backstory about the book itself? Why did you choose to write it now?
Yeah, Sriram, so there is a thing called conscious strategy and there is a thing called emergent strategy. So if you have gone through, you would have got this. Basically, what happens is you don't start by saying, I will write a book on strategy and get it published in 2 years. So at least for me, I think the first one I wrote, I mean, these are things that are there in your mind. So analytics was there. So obviously it was a little easier to write because you could talk about specific situations. It is more on the skill. So that worked out fine. But so then we asked the publisher, I mean, I want to come out with an enhanced edition. But then they said, instead of going back with the same thing, probably you should try a new topic. So I said, I will take a shot at it. And it would have been overwhelming if it is just for me to sit and write, because the field is so wide. So obviously it makes sense for two people to focus on that, to simplify that. And there are a couple of reasons, Sriram. One is, I write. I mean, both of my works are co-authored, but I try to write because when you go and look, like you said, I do some teaching. When you go and look, reference material, we will still keep going back to the same Google and this and that, and you hardly have any Indian stories or Indian perspectives. And you also go and look for any decent book on Amazon. By and large, it will be written by some author and selling it some 3,000, 4,000 rupees. So the the one of the reasons is, of course, you should, because we ourselves are creating a lot of best practices, and you would know better that if you compare the quality of HR in India versus what it is elsewhere, the differences. So yeah, so you have to get your perspective out. Second, you have to make Indian thinking and practices accessible to an Indian audience. And third, the subject, because I think it is something I think it's worth discussing about. So I think it evolved. So
Yeah. First of all, Sriram, thank you for hosting us here. It's always a pleasure to be here with people. We have been talking for years, kind of, and meeting so many of the people in the audience today. So absolute pleasure to be here. So, you know, the starting point for me was it's always easier when you are co-authoring with someone who has been there, done it. So, Ramesh had already done a book before, and he brought in expertise in terms of, what it makes to write a book and to start off. So I was always in a safe place with Ramesh around. Um, I wouldn't say things very differently from what Ramesh has already said, so I'll not repeat some of those things. But just to corroborate and add, two things. One is, in the recent years, I've been also hobnobbing a little closer with the academia, and that's where I also get to exactly what Ramesh said, that, there's so much of a space to bring in contribution from an Indian thinking, and not force fit a Western or a different culture fit or a different model into the India context. And we felt that, I think I have been very privileged to work with some amazing organizations, amazing contexts, whether it's Uber growth, whether it's a case of transformations, whether it's building global organizations, whether it's building cultures that win, creating value for business, etc. And I think there's so much which is happening. And at a certain point of time in your career, you also feel that there's a responsibility to give back and share back and contribute to the knowledge pool so that others can pick from there and keep taking it forward. So I think some of those, we saw a big opportunity to bring the India story out, and also to look at some of these things from a practitioner's perspective. You have good theory, but to make it, for a working professional in HR or for a person who's doing people management, if you can contextualize it and you can bring it in terms of how to make it work, we felt that we had that knowledge with us and we could bring it to light through a book. And that's possibly what motivated us.
No, I think it's a fantastic.
And maybe just one more point I would add to that, because it's important, Sriram. I think
Yeah,
the
go ahead,
other thing is when you have these discussions, HR organizations seem to be mostly saying, I have to be responsible for employee engagement. and I am responsible for attrition, and that is the only problem I'm looking to solve. I don't know whether you can solve that problem by yourself, first of all, but I think, like Som mentioned, there are different contexts in which different organizations exist. So everybody doesn't have to be the great place to work. Everybody doesn't have to say, there are industrial situations where you
Yeah.
may have to live with attrition and find the best way forward. So
Yeah.
we also thought the function is slightly putting itself into the restricted buckets of engagement and this, and not necessarily worrying so much about overall organizational performance. So we thought we should try to contextualize some of it in the broader framework of where business is headed, and that was also what we had tried to bring out.
Yeah. No,
Right.
I think it's a good, kind of, because I think there's a gap in this particular area, because the work that HR does in the Indian context is not similar actually to the Western context, because just the scale and the volume of growth that the industry has seen is unparalleled, and things are very, very different. So when you try to kind of use something from outside, it doesn't necessarily kind of work. And most times the books that when you see written by the Indian, it's more story type rather than actually practical implementational kind of books. We used to refer to Dave Ulrich maybe about 20 years ago, and I think what you've done over here is on those lines. And so great to have you and the book featured over here. I hope it becomes a bestseller. I've gone through it, haven't read it fully. I've done enough research just to come for this call. Perhaps I will, spend more time around it. I want to kind of move into the topic itself. And before I move into the enterprise, I want to just ask you about the individual. One of the questions that, when people in organizations, kind of look at something like this, their aspect is, I would like to thrive too. I want to thrive. However, I feel, that disconnected or stifled in my own organization. So to what extent is it practical for me to take ownership and do something about it? From your own experiences, if you want to guide an individual and saying, hey, these are the few things that you can do to thrive in a corporate, what would some of those be?
It's a great question. Like Ramesh already called out, organizational contexts vary, and every organization will have its own realities in terms of opportunities to contribute. But there is a common core which runs across all these organizations, right? And I think that um, for an individual, it's absolutely important to consider in terms of and understand where and how he or she fits in. It's also a case of taking accountability. It will never happen that the organization will always create the opportunity, the manager will always create the opportunity. I think it comes with the individual also to see where and how I can thrive and have that clarity. Of course, there are enough of role models, coaches, mentors, managers, everyone there to support. But the driving force has to, or the growth mindset has to come from within. The locus of control has to be within, you know. And I'm not saying this from just a conceptual perspective. I've seen enough and more people who have created that thriving, career path or the opportunities or that, situation for themselves by just first saying that they have the accountability to make it happen for themselves. The other thing which is also required is that the mindset that you need to continuously reinvent yourself kind of to thrive. Thriving is not with a fixed point mindset. You have to continuously say that there is a better way, a version of me, which I can look forward to. That could happen in terms of skill sets. It could happen in terms of expertise. It could happen in terms of networks, whatever the different dimension is. So I would say that, there is different perspectives, but the accountability starts within is what I would say.
And I think mastery is a never-ending journey, right?
Yeah.
There's always something that you can do. As long as you pursue mastery, there's learning, there is opportunity to grow. Ramesh, anything from your end?
No, I think maybe I'll just add one point to what, there are many. This is a great topic, a great question. So the thing is, in my experience, I'll say two things. I think after a point of time, I think you should always be prepared for your next role, right? And you should also know what kind of environments you will be successful, what kind of environments you will struggle. So personally, for me, I mean, I thought once you have worked in a, I mean, some of you have made a good transition, but actually, when I went into a GCC kind of environment, I struggled because I am slightly more used to, uh, you know, get developing things and getting them, and not necessarily little bit the display the patience required to navigate through a system. So I think you should also, after a point of time, reflect, get information, and see what kind of environments would suit you. Like, now somebody put a meme of KL Rahul talking to Rishabh Pant saying, money is good, position is good, but boss is very toxic. So, you need to do that kind of a research. He doesn't have an option. And the second, I think what I have seen some successful leaders that we know do is, even when you're doing this role, be prepared for your next act, right? So what I
Mm.
mean by that is, sometimes I have seen, there are people who after 15, 20 years get bored with corporate life and say, I want to do things on my own. And then you keep staying in this debate, should I do this, should I not do this, and keep dragging it on. And you are not thriving either case, but right. But the thing is, if you really want to be either to be successful on your role or in a leadership role, or you want to be on your own, you will still need network, you'll still need visibility, you will still need to be able to. I've seen many people say, I want to do consulting when they have not done hands-on work for the last 15 years in their careers, right? So some of that clarity would help, Sriram, some of that research would help. So which would come if we sometime, at least, first 10 years, okay, I mean, you keep going. But after that point of time, you start thinking, where am I headed? What I would be comfortable. And at least keep a little, some time aside to keep planning what your long-term career is. That should be helpful. I mean, based on my experience.
Most times we get caught into the comfort trap. And once you get caught there, then, even though you may aspirationally want something, it is just too uncomfortable to step out as a thing. And it's difficult. Practically, it's not easy as well. All right. So let's maybe move on. I want to move into the organizations and ask you from so organizations have had this mission, vision kind of thing for a long time. Uh, and most times the mission, or the vision has been more profit motive driven rather than purpose motive driven. What is, with respect to thriving itself, what would you recommend? And do you see a gap with respect to the purpose motive be needing to be strengthened, or what's your take on that?
Okay, I will take this first. I'll give it to Som. I am slightly, I could come across as being slightly cynical and all this, but end of the day, Sriram, corporates have to be profitable. There is, you can't. Well, I mean, your question could be that, we used to have these. So there are two things, right? Corporates have to be profitable, because if you're not profitable, your company collapses. If your company collapses, it is nothing for everyone. So, but I think, yes, purpose is important. I think we are coming on. But what is probably, I would look at a little differently and say, with time, organizations have become a lot more skewed, and especially the large listed ones have become more skewed towards the investor, right? So some new CEO comes in, they'll say, I'm going to lay off 5,000 people, my share price goes up by 20%. So I'm happy. And we have seen this, right? Many, even some extremely successful, profitable companies also laying off people because they can. So that, I think, worries me a little bit, that not you be profitable, you be a good citizen, you be good to shareholders also, but can you bring the balance back into the employee as a stakeholder as well, instead of saying, you may never get back to lifetime employment, but at least be more mindful in terms of balancing out the employees and the uh, investor interests. Be profitable, protect that. So slightly long termish, purpose driven, I'm not so sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
We'll
the
listen to.
ad would be, I think what's going up in the ecosystem is governance standards. And when governance standards are going up, it requires organizations to be much more responsible. And when you become much more responsible also brings in multidimensionality, and wherein the stakeholder interests comes into play. And, um, for example, the latest thing which is being talked about is ESG performance. Not only your financial performance, how you're doing on ESG performance. You have to do the ESG reporting. There are governance standards which are becoming much more sharper by the day, kind of a thing. So I think that drives more accountability from the organization side to be much more purposeful in terms of what they are doing. So we need to understand whether the organization is just doing it because they want to just comply and be green from and meet all the ecosystem standards, or whether it's a deep driven, larger commitment to the society, to the community, etc. For example, I think. Having spent 2 years in Jamshedpur and my first job being with the Tatas, for them, they have been operating when purpose was not even a buzzword or something which is or existed in the lexicon, but their way of looking at giving back to the society was in a much larger way. So we have to see whether organizations are misusing or mistaking in terms of how they interpret purpose, whether they're doing just for compliance or whether they're very clear in terms of they have a much larger commitment to the stakeholders around them. I think that's very, very important.
Okay, cool. So let's get into HR strategy for a little bit. When we talk of HR strategy, most CHROs, of course, believe that they have a HR strategy. And most times, in reality, it is actually the CEO's agenda, maybe a little bit of business goal-driven kind of extension of that. So in your view, what goes into a proper HR strategy and how to make it robust? We'll start with the thing and then, kind of get into more details. Yeah.
See, first, again, just to pick up my thoughts first, kind of thing on this one. Having worked with multiple organizations and, we seen the Infosys environment and now with Tesco, different organizations are wired differently in terms of how they look at strategy and how they look at getting different layers in the organization connected to the strategy. I know the time when we were there in Infosys, even when we had our annual strategy retreat, there was a mechanism to bring some young Infosians and they also look at the same strategy problem statements, and then they bring their view into the leadership as to how they would look at strategy. I think there was an element to look at just beyond the CEO at that point of time. The same thing which I see in Tesco now means we do sit in the leadership team, we do the wireframe from a strategy perspective, but then we have a mechanism called Think Strategy, where we go down all the way down to the frontline engineer to see how they would bring in their thoughts and connect to the strategy. And often for the leadership team, this is very, very revealing because with the change in generations and, also because our customers increasingly are becoming Gen Zs and, the younger. So it's very, very important to look beyond the CEO or the leadership team, even in terms of when you're framing strategy and trying to bring in the larger view perspective to it. And when you do that, you connecting employees, again, when you're looking at it from an HR strategy perspective, you are bringing in a larger view than just the CHRO or the leadership team. And one of the biggest things, at least in the last 2 years, is the concept of personas and realizing that the workforce is not just one size fits all kind of a thing. There are different needs, aspirations, motivations. And how do you, when you do the HR strategy, just that fact that how do you design up, say, for example, when we're trying to do our insurance plan, we realize that, some employees have the need for elderly care or some employees have a need for dependent care. But some employees have some very, very, very different needs, which can come from a D&I lens or a well-being lens, XYZ kind of a thing. So being aware and connecting employees possibly gets you into much more, like we say, from a product design perspective, being much more empathetic to the end user and then designing something which is much more relevant. I think that's something which I see is built into the ways of working of organizations that I have been with. And I would thereby disconnect with the thing that is a CEO's perspective. Maybe there are organizations, I'm not saying that it's not there, but I would think that progressive organizations possibly do it a little bit differently.
Okay. So just a quick response before I bring in Ramesh. I think there's an interesting visual which is going around, which says, leaders see, 6% of the problem, the line worker sees 100% of the problem. So certainly bringing them in, I think, makes sense. I don't know how many people will take the view seriously. Bringing them in still could be a show thing, saying, oh, okay, I'll get you in and tell everybody that, thing, but taking it seriously. But if they do, I think it certainly, it adds dimensions to your insight. So that's one. The second, of course, is this whole thing of one size fits all. No, I have a problem with that for a long time because I think that's inherited from the machine culture of, we've transitioned from there. So everything is like designed for machines, including our job description, saying, how can one, how can you fit the human to the job description, right? It is not possible. So in fact, we should be doing the reverse and take the human and say, okay, can you do 90% or 80% of this job? Is a far more thing, right? But we seem to be stuck because it's easier.
Sometimes, yeah, it's more convenient.
Ramesh, your views on this?
On which one? The one size fits
On the
all?
strategy.
Okay, so no, I think have you heard of this story of the fox and the hedgehog? It's
No,
a kind of
please
famous
go ahead.
parable.
Yeah.
So basically, what it says is the fox knows many different things, but the hedgehog knows one strong thing, right? I mean, it knows how to cover itself under crisis and then do manage it. So I mean, I try to look at HR in this perspective that HR also can do many things. We can acquire people, develop people, retain people, build culture. There's so many things that HR can do. Finance, I mean, I'm slightly being, tongue in cheek, but basically finance does two things very well. Yeah, if you want to improve profit, they'll help you build improve profit. They want to cut costs, they will help you cut costs, right? So two basic things. So what, in my view, what happens is there are so many things that HR can do. So then what happens is people typically end up chasing what I am going to be doing, because sometimes I get this thing that if I do the more things, then obviously I'm contributing, because I don't have that hedgehog thing of saying this is because, even if you look at turnover, there is always a partnership element. So from a strategy perspective, and this is what came out also, we surveyed more than 100 executives as part of the research, and the business folks saying that HR has a strategy was relatively lower than HR folks saying we have a strategy. So I think, sometimes we just don't. So the question is, I think what I think is people are going from trend to trend, practice to practice, buzzword to buzzword. You add up a lot of practices, but you don't stop once in a while and think, what am I doing? And I think that's all will lead to, in whatever form it is, right? Just this thing of asking once in a couple of years, hey, where are we going with our talent acquisition? Are we hiring the right people? Are we, I mean, is it shown up by quality? Is it shown up by retention? Is it shown up by cost? Is it shown up by, time to performance? Are we, where is our hiring going with what current instruments we have? If we are talking about learning and development, again, similar, you will have many practices, but are we making a difference? If not, we are making a difference, what do we need to do? So all that is required, Sriram, it could be a very nice document, it could be a scorecard, but end of the day, I think we need to just regularly check, ask questions, set long-term objectives and review. So you need to have a longer cycle. And that is what we also wanted to reinforce in this, that, you will have your quarterly cycle and annual cycle, but do you also have a long-term cycle to think about what you're doing and whether they are having the intended effect or not? That's all.
Similar to our old 5-year plan kind of a thing, but maybe not 5 years.
5 years are gone, no.
Okay, all right. So, Vic, I see your question. Maybe after this one, we'll take it. Okay. I just want them to talk about the core of the book and then we'll go on. So, in the book, there are 4 things that you mentioned, right? Capacity, capability, performance, and transformation. So, I want both of you to kind of talk about it a little more in detail and elaborate, and then, probably we'll take questions.
So maybe I'll do the first do, then I'll hand it over to Som.
Coming.
So this is where the iterations happen in Shriram. So when we started, the idea was that we would create a general reference and then talk about talent acquisition and then retention and learning and development kind of functions. But once we started doing more research and putting things together. That seemed to be more of a HR process way of expressing. If I look at it from what business needs perspective, then it is not necessarily talent acquisition, but it's actually the organizational capacity. So anyway, so once you're looking at capacity, so that's why we caught up this thing called capacity. Because again, I mean, now I'm probably reeling out the buzzwords, but basically, what is work is changing, what is an employee is changing, right? So an organization doesn't have to always look at an employment model, but you need to look at, do I need to do it myself? Do I need to use automation? Do I need to outsource it? Should I do this in-house? So those kind of questions have to be answered from the filter of quality, from the filter of cost, before you decide what shape the organization is going to be. So that is what we called as capacity. So it's not just workforce planning and deployment, but it is actually rather more about work planning. How do you look at different components? What is the best way of delivering work? Not all of that is going to be with HR, but HR will have a key role in terms of deciding on capacity. Capability comes in because capacity into capability equals your ability to deliver. And I remember, uh, you know, Professor J. Ramchandran, we used to have those in-house MBA programs. And I remember his example because he said, having capacity doesn't make a big difference because he says you want to play a chess match with Vishwanathan Anand. You choose white also. You also will have 16 pieces. He will also will have 16 pieces. End of 10 moves, you are finished, right? So the point is capacity is the pieces you have, but unless you have the capability, you're not going to achieve results. So capability comes back to, what kind of skill building you have, what paradigms do you use? Are you going to use the classical top-down paradigms for skill development, or are you going to go with the modern thing which says, the employee owns their career, so it is up to them to pick up and choose development. So I create a larger play for them to, do this. And in between, I think we also touch upon things like what is your organizational model? Are you somebody who's going to build your talent like we think HUL or IAS, that kind of an approach do you have? Or are you open to be more flexible as far as your talent is concerned and what kind of changes it entails? And also when things are changing like they are doing currently, how do you bring in certain agility to organizational capability building? Because both go hand in hand. So both are essential for you to deliver what you are going to be, what your business is expecting from you. So that is capacity and capability. So on performance and transformation.
Yeah, I think for us, the way we position performance, saying that, it's the differentiator. And when our hypothesis and how we've started off saying that when you talk of performance in the HR circles, the immediate point of reference becomes performance appraisal, the process. But when you looked at performance, we have looked at it and stretched the boundary, saying that there are multiple other things which we need to consider from a performance lens. Things like simple things like it's not as common sense, but sometimes we miss it on the way kind of is that, do you have the right organization design? Does it support the kind of performance that you want to focus upon? Do you have the right culture? You could have the right design, but if you don't have the right culture, then you don't get how that design should incorporate the kind of performance that you want to drive. We then looked at the kind of leadership alignment, in terms of does that bring in clarity in terms of where the focus should be? Or you're running like headless chickens, or you're trying to figure out which direction you need to run. And, everyone's running, everyone's busy. You feel your shortage of capacity, but that's particularly stemming because you don't have the right alignments within the organization. Are we clear in terms of what kind of collaboration we want to build? Because sometimes the view of the organization is only on each of the verticals or each of the capabilities in its individuality. But how do you bring the whole together? The simple saying that sum is more than the whole of the whole is more than the sum of the parts. How do you get into that kind of a thing? So some of those is how we have stretched the thinking that we should look at from a performance lens in terms of generating overall performance for the organization. The starting point is not the performance appraisal process. It's a small piece in the entire gamut from a performance lens. Then moving on to transformation, and like I said, having been with organizations that have gone through huge transformations, Nokia and Adobe, one not making it and another making a very successful transformation, got to see where HR plays a role, and then transformation then possibly was an event, but now it's a reality. It's like it's inbuilt into our ways of operating from a day-to-day perspective. And that's where we have looked at in terms of what makes organization even go through a proper transformation. We have brought in the concept what we call in terms of shifts and shocks. You know, uh, um, if you realize that there is a need to transform, and if you are going through the journey on a continuous basis, then you go the pathway which is we call shift. But when you go, if you are in denial, and which is again something which happened with Nokia, because they felt that they never thought that someone like a Google or someone like an Apple could come and disrupt them, because their focus was always on Siemens or from a Motorola, the traditional mobile companies. Then when you're in a sense of denial, that's when you are hit with a stage which is called the shock, and then it forms a different kind of a transformation journey. So that's something which I brought it out there. Then the other piece which I've called out in a book very specifically is digital transformation, because that's a big thing. And when we were writing the book, that time I was also freelancing and consulting with an industry or a company which was the number one in its own offerings. But they realized that with everything changing around them and where they fitted into the value stream, they would go out of business if they did not make the digital transformation. And some of the things which I've called out from a digital transformation, one of the interesting elements is the leadership readiness. Because some of the people who sit in the boardroom are possibly the furthest away from the digital savviness. And when an organization needs to go the digital journey, build the digital culture, then possibly they are the worst off in trying to drive that transformation and change. So how do organizations bring in the right people into play when they're talking of these kind of big shifts that they need to make? So that's something for an organization to pick up early and then move. If you look at, there's a chapter which we have built in earlier in the book, which we call strategic frameworks. And one of the frameworks we have called in over there is a dynamic capability framework. And there we say that, how are you able to even sense the need for a transformation? How do you seize the opportunity? And then how do you go about actually going and transform? So that's a framework we have put in reference. So when you're thinking of transformation, how do you look at the sensing, seizing, and that actual transforming to make it an end goal? And then we link it back and saying that how this all connect back, the capacity building, the capability building, and the performance and the transformation. And we've given a framework of which is based on our thinking, which brings in all the pieces together for an organization to look into and pursue.
And what we have actually done is taken an illustrative chapter, Sriram, and said for different kind of organizational scenarios, how these play out.
So I think the shift versus shock, kind of reminds me, even in personal growth, we say, okay, you can change through insight or you can change through pain, right? You have to choose which one. If you keep waiting, pain will come, right? But mostly because, people are so attached to their own ideas that you don't get the insight. So even though the signals are there, you wait for the pain and then it's too late perhaps to change. One follow-up I had on this is when you studied a variety of organizations, did you see more of a similarity or a disparity with respect to organizations and services versus manufacturing versus startups? Anything that stands out from that in manufacturing this is distinctly different or in startups this is distinctly different? Anything that shows up?
I think, maybe I'll just go first. I think I won't hazard it at a industry level, Sriram, because I don't think we have enough uh, inputs to make that conclusion. But what we did here, by talking to senior executives from the business side as well, is that I think if you're a smaller organization, you start up with one person does everything for HR kind of a phenomenon. And then you start bringing in the bureaucracy. And even if you're a reasonably large organization, effectiveness of HR is driven more by the leadership support. So you could, I mean, we interacted with a leader. He said, same organization, when the business leader is more open to people involvement, then it runs in a different way. When it is not there, it runs in a slightly different way. That is one. Third, I think we spoke to Pawan, who was in a senior role in Pepsi for long years, and then his perspective was that even how HR is looked at is in the hands of HR. So, one of the people who spoke to gave a good perspective. He said, typically every company does an offsite every year, right? Before, around this time, maybe, December, January is the time you do an offsite. We say we'll do the business planning. What role does HR play in this? Does HR say, okay, let us go? Last year we went to Goa. I mean, yeah, Goa, maybe you're not going. This year we'll go to Thailand or whatever be the destination, and HR will get this thing involved in terms of who will go, what cuisine, and all that. Or does HR get involved in setting, okay, that will be done, but HR says, this is what we need to discuss. These are the topics that have come up recently. So this is what the agenda we should have, and this is the kind of facilitation we need. This is what we need to do. So we saw it independent of industry, Shriram. It works both ways. If the leader is good, HR is good. That is the sweet spot. But there are cases where the leader could be wanting HR to step up and make an impact. And in that situation, does HR set the agenda sitting side by side with the leadership team? Or HR says, that is all for you guys to discuss. Let me ensure a great experience for you. So that's how I would look at it.
Yeah. And the question which you asked was very much on our mind, Shriram, when we were putting our thoughts through, and we felt that this could be on the minds of the readers and the practitioners also. So in some way, a little bit we have um, taken a stab at it in one of the chapters where we have looked at different industries, whether it's manufacturing, FMCG, retail, software, IT products, etc. We have looked into parameters in terms of, what is their profitability, what is the employee cost kind of thing, or what is their profits per employee, etc. kind of. And some of those are realities in which organizations operate. I used to work in organizations which had a 20% profit margin. Retail is a 4 to 5% profit margin. And of course, the conversations vary in terms of how much you can afford, in terms of how much you can spend, some of those, and how then that gets linked into the strategy that you built. That's there. But the core doesn't change, but in some of those, understanding the contextuality, of course, is important.
Wait, I'm going to pause here before, and ask people to kind of jump in. Vic, you had a question. Why don't you bring it up here?
Hey, hi, good evening. It's
Good
been a
evening.
great discussion, and I'm really enjoying every bit of it. My question is, what would be the top three advices, where human-centered organizations, HCOs, can be built to bring balance across customer, investor, and society, right? Especially for organizations where this is a lip service right now. When people talk about being human-centered, but then nothing beyond the PowerPoint.
So, great question again. And, when you're talking of human centricity and linking it to the employee value proposition as which organizations are trying to design or promise to their employees, one of the things is the mindset, which is the change from, process or policy mindset to more of an experience mindset. When you're thinking how the employee would feel, or that's when you're trying to think through in terms of how it lands. A big part of the change which is being seen in HR organizations now is looking at not only an implementation or execution, but looking at it from a change mindset. I'm seeing organizations now, or HR structures, which has an investment in someone who is managing HR change. And that's becoming a visible portfolio as part of the investment. So when you start thinking in that lens, you are, you're bringing in empathy to your mindset. You're thinking about the human centricity in a much more intentional way. So that's one piece, experience, change, etc. I would put out there. Second is, in terms of, I already talked about the persona part of it, when you going beyond the one size fits all and understand that not all employees are the same. And, you're thinking how you can offer. You may not be offering everything to everybody, but do you even acknowledge that all employees are not same? Organizations talk of diversity, and most often I see the metric is, oh, I have 20% diversity or 30% diversity. I think that's just a starting point. What goes in terms of how you design your policies, practices, offerings, experiences, so that you can respect that diversity when that's inside the organization. I think that's the second thing from my side. Ramesh, if you want to add something.
I think the persona-based design is an excellent idea. So not easy, but certainly doable in certain, at least at a higher level. It's, I think, a fantastic idea to even experiment with.
We are doing it in product design, etc. Why not in the HR space in terms of employees?
Nice.
I think one trend that we are seeing is a skew in terms of how you look at talent also. I think, especially in the newer industries, for some people, you will do anything. Like recently, there is this gentleman called Mustafa Suleiman, who was the head of DeepMind. Then he sold it to Google. Then he came out. Now Google bought his company back for, I don't know, maybe some $200 million, basically to get him back onto Google, right? So if there is an individual can stand out, organizations are willing to bend backwards and do anything for them. But that probably applies to only 5% of the entire workforce. The rest, I think, have to face the vicissitudes and then, just see what differentiates you. Build up, know what you are strong in and then try to exploit and leverage that. Then I think you are becoming more indispensable. Otherwise, I think it's driven basically by if it is an unlisted private company, I think, there is still a lot of scope for being employee centered. I know there are some of these companies are unspoken. I know there are manufacturing companies that I worked some work for a manufacturing company who's headquartered out of Coimbatore, but they have a factory near Hosur, and they have a township where people can stay and work. When COVID hit, obviously, this was a township, so not large scale. The company pretty much ensured the entire, the health, the food, everything for all the people in the colony for almost 10 months. And they don't talk too much about it because I think that is part of their operating philosophy. Nobody is going to ask them and saying, there is 7% dip in your margin because you did this welfare measures. So unfortunately, once you start becoming listed, you were focused on a few measures. There are people trying to break through. They say that, you need to have people measures also in terms of how do you overall evaluate a company. I think it's still work in progress.
Great. Usha, your question.
Thanks, Ramesh. I like the specific perspective of the people measures, because I think today what the board of directors, I'm part of one of them, is that they miss out on that aspect. And I think when that thinking comes in, the other things can slowly start to follow.
Vikram, I think I know it's going to be done probably in the next 20 years, but as part of our discussions, we spoke to several senior HR professionals, and one of them said, who was CHRO for a very large organization. One of them, he said that it is always, whenever you do agenda review, HR will always be in the end. One of my challenges, and I think one of my successes there, at least I moved it from being the last item on the agenda to something which is slightly earlier. So yes, that is reality in many organizations, Vikram.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Sriram.
Go ahead, Usha.
Yeah. So by the way of introduction, I'm Usha Kiran and I'm an Infoscion. And it is so heartening to see references to Professor J. Ramchandran and all. I think we share a lot of, common threads. And happy to see Sriram has still maintained his calm demeanor, and the only change are the grays that, we can see. So right now I work in the regulatory compliance space. I'm an associate director with KPMG. I find that the lines are blurring on employee experience because it's contributed by multiple departments in the organization. And something as simple as transport can drive employee experience in a city like Bangalore, where transport itself is a huge challenge. So there was one conversation where I came across where a senior partner mentioned that we are not a transport company, we are a big four. So when I hear examples and references of Nokia and all that, I'm wondering, are we, seeing symptoms of that? Should we be, even though we are not, we are, a big four and we are a major consulting company, but is is that view right to say that we are not a transport company and hence that's a different function we will provide possibly a certain standard and not beyond? Is that the right lens to use? And subsequently, do you think this problem has better solutioning when we see more CHROs get into CEO roles?
Multiple parts to your question, thinking through, but great question. So even if you look at when you talk of future of work, when you're talking what would be important, we are talking of the work dimension, you're talking of the workforce dimension, we are talking of the workplace dimension, which will all come together to, so, and I don't think the HR function or the HR team will necessarily control everything out there in terms of what goes to create great employee experiences kind of. And there would be multiple stakeholders in the organization who would have a day job which contributes to it. What happens as a problem, which I see, I call it when I talk to my team, is that, you have a starry night, you go and see a lot of stars sprinkling over there, and then when you look at the constellations where the stars get arranged in a particular way, that's when you say this is a beautiful constellation kind of a thing. What happens is that everybody is pursuing and doing different things which impacts the employees, which is the starry night syndrome kind of a thing, and everything is glittering or not glittering, etc. But organizations which do better and which are respected are the ones which are doing it in a coordinated manner and which shows up as a constellation kind of a thing. Sometimes what organizations need to look at is this multitude of offerings or actions which are happening, sometimes happening in very, very siloed environments kind of a thing. Like you said, the transport function going and some department going and making a decision, and then another function going and something. So the employee is confused. Am I getting something good from the organization or getting something? I think it's more of getting things orchestrated within the organization. Yes, we understand there are certain trade-offs which will be made. At the end of it, it's a business, like Ramesh said earlier, that the business has to be profitable, and there has to be certain trade-offs which have to be made. I don't think any organization will be offering the best in everything kind of. And it's no shame for the organization to go and say, these are the areas where industry leading, these are where we are trying to match most of the companies, and these are the areas we need to do more work kind of a thing. But being transparent and honest and making the narrative right, I think that's a big factor in terms of winning the trust of employees and seeing that they understand why the organization is doing certain things in a certain way.
And I think I'll just maybe add a word to that. One of the frameworks that we referred to is what is called as the where do you play, how do you win, right? This is Ram Charan and what is his name? Bill Lafley, I think, right? So where basically says, you have to be clear about where do you want to play and how do you want to win. So if you say that I don't want to play, I want to play in terms of making a difference in terms of culture, in terms of the quality of work, in terms of options. And I don't want to play in terms of transport or in terms of, even parking areas, I believe is a big problem in many cities right now. So that is not where I want to play. I think it's absolutely fine. I think, but if you choose where you want to play, right? You can say we are not a transport company, but what you are you being honest to it and are you doing a great job of it is what is more important, I would think.
All right. I'm going to do a quick rapid fire before we close. Okay, we have a couple of minutes. So, so are you ready, Ramesh and so?
Hey, when do I ask a
Hey,
question,
Devi.
Ramesh?
Yes, Devi. Go
Hey,
ahead.
Devi, ask the question.
I just came. I was so curious to see
Welcome
sound,
back from
and
your
so
world tour, my friend.
Good to
Hey,
see you.
congratulations.
thank you,
Heavy
What
world tour.
thank you,
for us
thank you.
getting out of Bangalore only is difficult. You have gone all the way to London. Amazing thing. London only.
Yeah,
London.
London. Yes, because you are in Bangalore, you are not able to go out. So,
Well said.
Okay, he
hey,
came to London
good,
by
good to
car, not by
so
flight.
good to
That's what
see
we
you.
have.
Yeah, so good to see you, three of you. Sriram, congratulations, Ramesh, and I just came to know that you guys have the call is because to talk about your book. So congratulations again, and I'm so happy to see three of you. I think we have been talking after I'm talking to all of you after 20 years, 20 years now. Yeah, almost.
Good to see you, man.
So good to see you all. Tell me, just curious, what triggered both of you to write? How did you come together first, Som and Sound, and what triggered you to write this book?
No, I think I covered it earlier also, Devi. I think it is just that one, of course, we saw that people are getting little lost in the woods for the trees, lost the trees for the wood. So
Yeah.
you are able to you focus on many things, but you don't ask the question enough as to why I am doing this, and the kind of business challenges could vary from industry to industry and company life cycle. And second, I think it's also an attempt to create a more Indian narrative of, right now, if you're going to be 5 trillion economy, I don't think there are even 5 books on strategy, HR strategy, for instance, right? So I think it is also an idea between us. We have almost 50 years experience, and so we should put it together. And the way it happened was, I had started off this in the middle of 2019, and then, what happened in 2020, 2021,
Yeah.
right? So at that time, I think Som had also taken time out from his job. So he was doing consulting for a while. So then we said, and this was an option which I shared with him. So then we started putting it together and built on that. So
Yeah.
that's how it came together, really.
All that, and
Fantastic.
maybe it was COVID time, so Bangalore people had 3 hours on a day because they didn't have to venture
Yeah.
on the road. So a lot of
Travel. But I must tell you, thanks, Sriram, for moderating it so well. And just what I felt in the last 30 minutes listening to both of you is that I'm seeing a lot of these youngsters, the new CHROs, and trying to make an impact. But most of it is copy paste type. I think going in a very treaded way, saying that go for the annual plan, try do something, create some goals for yourself, try and meet it. You know, irrespective of what where things are happening. But I think you have been looking at it from a very different perspective, right? How do you create value? How do you look at that sensing? That empathy, thinking with empathy before designing whatever you want to design for your employees. This constellation, I think those are beautiful way of putting it. And I think there looks to be something really interesting in the book. I'm going to read that again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You, Devi.
Yeah.
Chand, yes, please, your question, please.
Thank you, Sriram, and thanks for organizing this. Wonderful to hear you, Ramesh and Som. I'm quite looking forward to reading the book now. My question, as a practitioner, I find to contrasting, or rather, on a continuum, I find that some of the family-owned businesses are very patriarchal. They're literally like life coaches for the employees. And the example that you gave of the Coimbatore firm is quite similar there, that I'm going to take care of you, don't worry. And though in the instance that you shared, it doesn't come across as patriarchal, but there are instances where I've seen that the employer wants to have an opinion on the guy's marriage as well, for example, so which I find a little difficult. On the other hand, I see multinationals, and maybe this is my reading, but the American multinationals are really cut and dry. They say, this is what you got to do, and we don't care what happens to you in doing it. On the other hand, my early years of experience with a company called Alfa Laval, which is a Swedish company, I think there is a North European culture, and I think that's something to do with the Vikings. I don't know. I hypothesize that 20 people on a boat, they got in absolutely deadly weather, crossing the seas to raid a village. So you got to look out for each other, and they really look out for you. My experience of being part of a great team, one of those great experiences was being part of that organization. Um, so my question is there a way to look at this? I'm sure there's a lot of context in to what extent do you want to, as an organization to offer your support or to, so to say, go out of the way. And what I learned and some of the insights that I got is that it has to be business driven because the business doesn't survive. You can't keep doing it anymore. But are there some ways to figure out what is the right? Because sometimes what you're trying to offer, the millennial may not want you to go there. They say, don't interfere in my life. I'm happy just giving you the 8 hours or 14 hours like Mr. Narayan Murthy wants, but rest of it stay out. What are some of the insights you can uh, share that can help in kind of figuring this out in the right way for a client?
Yeah, and I think you stated very beautifully that, of course, there are differences. It could be differences based on the kind of business. It could be difference based on markets, regulations, etc. It could be differences based on generational expectations. There are multiple things that we need to factor it in. What becomes very important is whatever you do. I think Ramesh was alluding to that a little bit earlier, was saying that connect your audience to what you're trying to do. Sometimes, I've seen many HR organizations or CHRs trying to push an agenda. It's a tick off that I have done this, or the team has done this kind of a thing, but not going back and connecting and closing the loop. That did it make or create some value, or did it to the end user? That's the part which people miss out. And that's where I was trying to say that, look at it things from a change. My conversations with some of the rewards leaders is that it's not a thing of how many benefits programs you roll out, but do you connect your employees to the benefits that you have rolled out as to why it makes sense for them? Do you have there's a lot of effort and strategizing which goes into designing and getting the approvals, but people miss out in terms of the time of execution to the post-execution phase, because they have gone to and start the run again. What will be the next one out there, kind of a thing. And that's where 99% of the offerings miss out, and organizations fail to get value from what they have spent months to design. I think that part is the most important part of the HR strategy, which should also be built into the entire value chain.
So I think it would comes back at, so I mean, maybe I'll just step back a little bit and say, yes, I think business is important and business needs to be protected, but that doesn't mean that, and tomorrow if company is getting into losses, you need to let go of people, you need to do that, right? Those things you have to do. But I think the challenge is really that it doesn't, each company has a certain ethos. Like you said, European companies are more balanced, more considerate. But unfortunately, they are losing out across the broad spectrum to companies from the US or China or even India right now, right? Otherwise, it's a great working model, right? And so the ethos, I suppose every company has a certain ethos. And I think HR can operate within that framework. It can be, because when I say ethos, I mean, even the same company can change over 20 years. So I think then it becomes very situational and contextual. Like, I mean, I just remember, right, 2005, 6 time frame. I think we had in Infosys, we had introduced variable compensation. And there used to be jokes going around that, we don't understand what our compensation structure is, because I think they wanted to make sure that the profitability is protected, so it is not risked on the basis of compensation. So it was not very popular at that point of time. But at the same time, I think there was a storm in Texas, or not Texas. I think Houston, right? They said, this Florida kind, not Florida, of course. I mean, that coastline, there is this big storm coming. And within 12 hours, the company had decided to airlift all the employees who are in Houston to a safer destination. Two very different actions, but I think the magnitude. So when it was a crisis, that when you have to take care, I think the decision, nobody bothered about the cost. So I guess it comes down to the kind of trade-offs leadership teams make, Narayan. So it's a little more nuanced and complex, I would say, right? So, and it's a multitude of factors. It's not HR, it's probably the leaders, it's probably the culture. Always a benevolent founder helps, but that happens maybe in benevolent and professional founder helps, but that probably happens in 5% of the cases. So
Wonderful. Thank you for the insights.
Thank you, guys. A very quick rapid fire, because I promised to do it. Just 1 minute and then we'll close. Your favorite recommendation of book to read?
I would, one of the most impactful ones I've read in recent times is a book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. It's more about how the best leaders make everyone wiser around them. It's a very, very beautiful book. And there's a concept in that called accidental diminishers, where sometimes because of a lack of awareness or self-awareness, we bring everybody around us to a suboptimal level. So I would recommend that book to everyone.
Fantastic. Ramesh?
This, so I'm just searching for it, Sriram, so I'll come back to it.
Okay, all right. Okay, so
That's a book I
who
definitely like
inspired?
to recommend to everyone. Just the name slips my mind. I'll come back and tell you.
Okay. So Som, who inspired you the most from a corporate perspective?
Oh my God, that's a difficult one, kind of. I would possibly go back to my first job because I started off with the Tatas, and everybody talks about Ratan Tata and the Tata legacy. I think I would go back to a Ratan Tata kind of a thing, and the kind of culture that was there in the Tata organization that I worked with. I think some of those things have stayed on with me from the beginning of my career.
Fantastic. I'll close with Som and then go to Ramesh. So one practice or habit that you swear by, Som.
I believe in spending time on reflections because all the time we keep running, running, running. I do find out time, my hour in the day where I can't do it every day, but I do try to find a time when it's my me time. I go out for a walk, etc., kind of a thing, and it's my time for reflection. I think that really, really helps to close a lot of loops that stay open and makes us sucks our energy or brings in frustration. So the reflection.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Very, very important. Ramesh, over to you. So
Okay,
your
so I'll come
favorite
back
book.
on the book first. So the book
Ah,
which I'm really amazed is a book called um, what is it called? An Immense World. How Animal Senses Reveal the Hidden Realms Around Us. This is by a guy called Ed Yong. So Ed Yong, I think, writes for NYT, but his earlier book was on microbes and bacteria. So this, I only try to read it in flight because when I'm not distracted, so I've not finished it. But it talks about how, I mean, what we think is human is just for us, right? How each different species relate to their sensing world. Absolutely fascinating book. The second, I think, inspiration, I would think, I mean, suddenly you have asked me, I would think it is Mr. N.S. Raghavan, who's one of the co-founders of Infosys. I had the opportunity to work with him and I think his thinking influenced a lot of the early great practices of Infosys. What is the third question?
third question is a practice or a habit that you swear by.
Keep something, always stay in touch with something which you're passionate about. So, maybe again, I'm into storytelling mode. So, we were into this lockdown for 4 or 5 months and nothing was happening. So, typically, if you look at sport, right, if you look at cricket, it is just a bunch of people hitting a ball, somebody catching, somebody running. But what we realized was after 5 months, they had a session of IPL in the Middle East. And suddenly I was ending up watching every match daily. And then I realized was this probably is just trivial in the larger scheme of things, but it probably, makes a big difference to you. So, I have continued to follow cricket wherever, whatever time and stuff like that. So I think you should try to find time for your interest, irrespective of your work responsibilities.
Fantastic, fantastic.
I
Thank you.
mean,
Thank you.
just make sure your work is done, but I don't want to finish it like that. But I guess you need to still stay in touch with what excites you.
Thank you, Som, Ramesh. Again, a call out to the book, Thriving on Talent. Okay, please pick it up from Amazon. Ramesh has put the link over there. If you don't have the link, please reach out to me. I'll send it to you. Thanks again, Ramesh. Som, I know you have to run. Okay, thank you everybody for joining. We'll put it up on LinkedIn and YouTube, and also put out snippets at different points of time so that we reach more people. Thank you for your time again. Bye bye.
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to My Startup TV.